The 2014 legislative session moved more public land legislation to the governor's desk than in any previous session, the bulk of it sponsored by legislators from urban areas. They ranged from having the means to declare state wilderness lands to having a means to take over and run the national parks in case of another federal shutdown. Today we will discuss the range of these public land laws and the implications they will have on the state and the public land transfer movement. This is the County Seat. Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we wanted to take a half an hour to try to get up to speed on the massive number of lands-related bills that came to the state of Utah and were engaged in the legislative session. Well, to do that, in my estimation, there's no better person to have as a guest for a one-on-one conversation than Mark Ward from the Utah Association of Counties. I first ran across Mark several years ago after being primered by Kane County Commissioner Mark Habishaw on roads, and Mark's first comment after dealing with Mark Habishaw is, "Are you an attorney?" Which I'm not. But I think that as far as anybody who has a grasp of the breadth of issues of land and road issues across the state, Mark's the guy to do it. Thanks for taking the time.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chad.
All right. Well, you know, we can kind of undo our ties and make this an informal conversation today. What was unique about this year's legislative session as far as lands bills?
There were quite a number of bills that I think are taking the public lands transfer movement out of the sort of the edge and more into the mainstream. There's a lot of evidence that that movement is here to stay.
What is to you the most significant piece out of that entire list you brought to review?
Probably the creation by Representative Stratton of this interstate compact for the transfer of federal lands to states. The reason being is as soon as another state joins with Utah on that, and I think there are 2 or 3 are lined up to do that, that will automatically pull Congress into the conversation.
You mean by virtue of this act, it would become a compact, and then interstate compacts have to have Congress to validate them?
Yes, under the Constitution, no attempt by 2 or more states to create a compact is valid unless Congress has oversight and approves. So that will automatically pull Congress into the situation whether Congress likes it or not.
So basically, if each state took this individually and passed their own transfer of public land, set a deadline for the government doesn't respond, then their only resource would be to go to court. But if 2 states pass those laws and they then form a compact, then the Congress has to be involved in it. To settle it, and that might push the agencies to dispose of the public land?
Well, probably not voluntarily, but it would push Congress toward a solution, a legislative solution for it. Congress is the landlord of these lands, these federal lands. By the Constitution, the Congress makes the rules for when you sell them, when you keep them, what you do with them, and they cannot ignore a multi-state compact in this regard.
Okay, so basically to set the record straight, in 1976 when they passed the Federal Lands Policy Management Act, FLPMA, that officially ended the disposal of federal lands that were undesignated, said we're going to keep them.
Right.
And that was an act of Congress.
That was.
And so if this compact comes up, it forces them to come back and readdress that issue?
Exactly. That's a good example, using FLPMA, because it illustrates that in the end, Congress is in charge. Congress giveth, Congress taketh away.
We're going to take a break. We'll pick up that conversation on the implications of House Bill 158 when we come back. Stay with us.
You go through the day-to-day repeating what you did yesterday. Don't you wish you could access that piece of your life that's missing? Find the beauty, serenity, family fun, or anything else that's missing from your life in the Cedar City, Bryan Head area. Gain access to your adventure, whether it's camping, hiking, the arts, festivals, or just a getaway. Visit ScenicSouthernUtah.com for details on all the adventures that you can access in scenic Southern Utah.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
How would you spend an extra day in Utah Valley? Stay one more day. Visit utahvalley.com to make reservations. Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Color. It's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are having a conversation today with Mark Ward from the Utah Association of Counties. He is their public lands attorney and has been very active in the legislature. We were talking about House Bill 158, which passed the legislature, and putting it in simple terms, counties have a land use plan, and the federal agencies are supposed to respect that plan when they come up with their resource management plans in as much as they possibly can.
The legislature identified about 12 areas in southern Utah on BLM and Forest Service land and said, this is our policy for how those lands ought to be managed. They ought to be managed for the maximization of grazing and the maximization of timber and forest products.
So we'll pick up this discussion after the break, but in summary, you're saying that it kind of takes county land planning and codifies it with the state and puts it out there for the federal government to respond to.
Yeah, hopefully this will send a signal to them that, you know, it's not just the counties you have to worry about, it's the state. And under federal law, federal agencies must comport to, as much as they can, the state and local policy. So this adds the state piece to it.
So now 2 against 1 instead of 1 against 1, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the state, the county on one side, the federal agency on the other. And, you know, the idea here isn't here to try to create some kind of competition, but it's what was envisioned by Congress when they passed FLPMA and passed the National Forest Management Act, is that all three would work together. And, but that ideal has not been reached yet, Chad. We're still on the front end of that.
You know, people who are, say, under 25 years old really have no recognition or recollection that Utah used to be a timber-producing state, because there's virtually no timber left, is
right.
there?
The landscape used to be dotted with timber mills, you know, sawmills, and it was just there were jobs. And you're right, the younger generation, that the new normal for them is, you know, forest is something you just walk through, and the agricultural part of it is missing. Yet the Forest Service is managed under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So that's a good observation.
How big of an impact do you think that's had on some of the rural counties?
Oh, it's economically, it's hard to measure. You know, the vitality that used to exist in a lot of those communities is really gone.
Okay, so I guess that's a question. I remember when I was a kid, we'd drive through Marysville as a town, and it was going little town.
Yeah.
And now you drive through it, it started to come back because of recreation, but not like it used to be.
Recreation will never support the kind of jobs that the timber industry did. It'll support some jobs, but not the kind that will support a family and that will energize a local economy.
But as you look at some of these little towns like, you know, Altamont or Marysville or Junction or some of these forest access communities, even down in Kanab, I imagine used to be fairly good. You know, you look at some of those towns and they've really suffered as a result. But is that the cause? Is the loss of forestry the cause?
I would say that's a major cause, yeah. That and loss of maybe mineral producing, activities, coal and different things that happen. I mean, over in the town of Escalante, the locals call it Escalant. They got a problem keeping the schools running because the families that have kids and that keep an economy going and keep a community going, it's dwindling. And that's another example of a town that used to be robust in terms of, both mineral and forest activities. So we're trying to do something to turn it around. The transfer of public lands is an issue, but that's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. We're trying to maximize every tool we have under federal law, and so that's where the legislature stepped in. This effort in House Bill 158, covers several counties. I'll just tick them off real quickly. San Juan, Kane, Garfield, Wayne, Sevier, Emery, San Pete, Paiute, Iron, Beaver counties now have substantial land masses that have been designated under this bill. Now we'll have to wait and see how much respect the federal land management agencies give this. We hope they do.
Okay, well, let's move down the list on a couple of other issues. Let's pick the next bill that you think is worthy of conversation.
An interesting bill is and it's a little bit controversial among the counties. It's House Bill 160, Representative Steve Handy, who is a Wasatch Front legislator and one of a growing number of Wasatch Front legislators who are taking an interest in public lands. I like his vision on this. What it is but it's a little controversial. This bill provides a framework for the designation of wilderness in Utah. Now, some people say, what? Is that a county issue? Designation of wilderness? Well, it kind of goes hand in hand with the transfer of federal lands movement by Ken Ivory. And it's a way of saying to the world, if all the federal lands get transferred to Utah, as is envisioned, it doesn't mean that there's going to be an absolute shutdown of protection measures where pockets of land deserve wilderness type protection. So it's a way of saying, hey, look, if these federal lands ever happen to drop into the state's lap, there will already be an infrastructure in place, a legal infrastructure to designate lands. So those people say, wait a minute, you're going to put all this beyond the Federal Wilderness Act. No, there'll be something there. It doesn't mean we're going to roll over and make wilderness left and right, but there'll be a procedural process in place so that if the citizens of Utah, not the citizens on the East Coast, but if the citizens of Utah, through a locally driven process, say, you know what, this piece of ground is worthy of wilderness designation. It'll be a locally driven process, and it'll be handled by a local law. So
that's really the way it should be, in my opinion.
That's the way it should be. This isn't about necessarily wilderness is good, wilderness is bad. It's about local control, Chad.
Do you read in that bill that there would be the ability for the state to redefine or categorize or make subcategories of wilderness? Because
I do.
Years ago there was a mechanism bandied about creating a backcountry designation that would be a buffer around designated wilderness areas instead of just making bigger wilderness.
It would be up to our legislature to make all those many determinations.
But they would fit under the process of this particular law?
They would.
Okay.
Now, there may be some future massaging of this as time goes on, but this is a step out, the first step out into, it's Utah acting as if we are ready to manage all of our lands. And it's not like saying, well, we don't know what to do. We're not the federal government. We can't have a wilderness procedure. Well, yes, we can. We can act like we own the land.
Let me ask one question that you brought up before we go to our break. You said there are a growing number of urban legislators dealing in public land policy. How many?
Representative Stratton, Representative Roberts, Representative Ivory, Representative Handy, and it's always dangerous when I say this because I may leave somebody out. I may get a call from some legislator saying, you didn't mention me.
Call me and we'll announce it on the next show, okay?
But, those are some that come to mind. Those are all Wasatch Front legislators.
Roger Barris is...
Roger Barris
is
over, obviously he has great interest. Those are some that come to mind immediately. Had you asked me that question 6, 7, 8 years ago, I would have just been able to cite to legislators, but these are Wasatch Front legislators, up and down the Wasatch Front, because they realize that there's a connection between what happens on federal lands in rural parts of the state and the well-being of citizens on the Wasatch Front.
Very good. Mark, thanks. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with more of our conversation on public lands and how they were shaped by this year's Utah State Legislative session. We'll be right back.
I didn't order this. Compliments of the lady in gold. Hello, trouble.
Anything worth doing in this quiet little town?
You look like the kind of man that could show a girl a good time.
You strike me as the kind of girl that likes a manicure and a massage.
How's that for a manicure?
I hate golf.
I was hoping for something a little more vigorous.
Vigorous, I can do.
And I thought you'd be riding side saddle.
What? I'm gonna regret this. How about that manicure?
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah, mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit Ogden.com.
Landscapes as diverse as the people who venture to find them await. All you have to do is find a place to begin. Moab, Utah, in Grand County, where adventure begins.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're having a conversation today with Mark Ward from the Utah Association of Counties. What we've been talking about is the big increase in public land attention and bills that have been run through the legislature. You know, Mark, it's kind of interesting because when Representative Ivory's bill passed and the governor signed it, and we started this whole dialogue of land transfer, there were those wishful thinkers that said, we got to do something, let's get started. And then there were a whole bunch of naysayers. I remember hearing rather conservative radio people around here call it crazy talk and say that it was insane to think that we could do this. But that conversation or that criticism changed a lot after the government shutdown last year.
It sure did.
And that prompted some additional legislation. How's that legislation shake out?
This legislation, this House Bill 133, authorizes the governor in working with Congress to put forward state resources, our own expertise, our land management expertise, to basically run those federal facilities in the event of another federal shutdown. And like you said, the federal shutdown is an evidence of how tough things are getting financially at the federal level. And so it's again it's kind of like that wilderness bill I talked a minute ago. It's Utah stepping forward saying, we're ready, we can do it, here's another bill that proves it. We got all the pieces in place, we can manage these lands.
Okay, so on the first shutdown, there originally was talk about the county sheriffs providing law enforcement so they could open the parks up, and they would put state employees on to keep them minimally open and just to keep things running so that the visitors didn't have to be turned away. The federal government rejected that proposal and said, well, you can pay us to hire our people to run everything while the shutdown goes on, and maybe we will or maybe we won't pay you back. But
right, and it was a tough choice, but the counties in the state at that point said, look, every day these facilities remain closed. This hemorrhages our local economy. So we made the tough choice and said, all right, we'll pay you. And, the state forked out for it, and here we are. The state has still not yet been reimbursed by Congress. And there's nobody willing to give a clear signal at the federal level that they're going to be reimbursed.
How does this bill differ that process than the last time?
Well, unfortunately, it can't, the bill by itself can't force Congress's hand, but at least it shows Congress that we have an orderly, systematic procedure in place to take our own agencies, sheriffs, county, state level, the state forestry, fire, and state lands, and put them to work. It's an authorization and a careful planning of ways to put them to work, whereas last summer it was just kind of an ad hoc thing, and that's one of the things Congress is. So I'd say, Chad, it creates a normal, regularized procedure for going forward.
If I recall, last year, some of the issue that the sheriffs, in doing the law enforcement, is they were concerned about the way they were situated in doing it ad hoc, that there might be a liability for them. Does this address some of those issues?
I don't believe this. That's a good question, and that's probably a good point to look at in future years, but I don't believe this one does that yet. That's a good point. The liability question, I don't think this bill tackles that, so it's probably something for maybe next year to look at.
So any of you legislators who want to get in on the public land debate, here's a good suggestion for a bill for you to enter next session, okay? Just saying. Let's continue on with your next pick.
Well, law enforcement on federal lands is always a sticky issue. The line of scrimmage between the local sheriffs and the law enforcement agents of the BLM and the Forest Service. Legislation this year consisted of basically a direction from the legislature to the sheriffs that says you cannot recognize the exercise of law enforcement authority by a federal agent if they're trying to enforce state law, which happens sometimes. You get BLM, Forest Service agents try to pull people over for state law infractions. The bill says the only way you can do that is if you're not available and there's an emergency and the federal agent has to act, or if you deputize them through a formal agreement.
Okay, and I have a follow-up question I want to ask to that. We do have to take another break, unfortunately. We will be right back with the county seat. A very good conversation.
The best part about raising children here in Vernal and the Uinta Basin is just the smaller community that makes you feel like when you go somewhere, you know everybody.
So we packed up our 3 kids and here we came to Uinta County. And what a great place it was. What a great move. Great schools, great outdoor activities. Just a really great place to raise your family.
My father, he was an engineer for Chevron, retired 39 some odd years. And Jeff, my husband, it's the same way. He's always worked in the oil and gas, always had a job here. And with that industry, when it does good, the whole valley thrives.
Uinta Basin's been fantastic in supporting what we've tried to do both as a business and also in the development of mountain bike trails and the sport of mountain biking.
I'm able to run up to a beautiful place like this and spend some good quality time. It's one of the big reasons why I live where I live.
And that makes it just a wonderful place to have little ones like this.
ATV? Check. 4-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
Welcome back to the county seat. This half hour is going by far too quickly because we've got so many bills to talk about and not much time. I want to go back to this whole issue because I know that for the 3.5 years we've been on the air, this has been a constant conflict between the sheriffs and the federal law enforcement agencies. They both think they're right. And there was a mechanism that the federal agencies were duplicating, as I understood it, duplicating state laws like traffic laws and putting them into the federal code of regulations, or whatever they call it.
Well, they
and
were
writing a parallel ticket that instead of going to a local magistrate, you go to a federal magistrate.
Right.
How did that work?
Well, the federal agents were reaching for an act called the Federal Assimilative Crimes Act, FACA, which is a very short provision that says if you've got a situation where the offense looks like it's an offense of state law, you can reach for state law through the FACA. It's kind of a fiction. You can act like you're opposing state law through the FACA and write tickets and infractions based on that. The House bill that came out this year, 149, says sheriffs will not recognize that unless the offense takes place on what are called federal enclave lands, or federal buildings that are set up under the Constitution, which comprise only about 1% to 2% of all federal lands in the state. Most of your federal lands are what are called proprietary jurisdiction lands, where the federal government recognizes in their own manuals, DOJ practice manuals and sheriff training manuals, that the FACA is not appropriate. I know this is a little technical, Chad, but the FACA cannot be used on most federal lands in the state. And we finally got our act together at the legislature to say yes, and counties, sheriffs, we're going to take away your ability to recognize that exercise. So now the county sheriffs can say, hey, the legislature has told us what to do. We can't recognize that kind of action. So hopefully it'll rein in federal agents to quit enforcing state law and just enforce their own laws.
Okay, one last question for you. How many bills, land-related bills, did we pass this year?
That I'm aware of, 13 bills, which is quite a hefty amount. 13 bills that deal with, and we've only discussed a few of them here today, but a growing attention that I can see. I've seen it trend upward, both in terms of numbers of bills, in terms of different areas of the state where legislators are getting involved, particularly the Wasatch Front. The public lands movement is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. That's for sure.
Very good. Thank you, Mark, for joining us today on the County Seat. Thank you for watching. Follow us on Facebook. Make your comments there. And you can also read the blog on our website. We'll look for you next week on the County Seat. See you then.
Watch at your leisure Saturday nights at 10:30 and Sunday mornings at 9 on ABC4 Utah.
Welcome to the Geek Report. I'm Stephen Heumann. This is your spot for all geek news from tech to comic books and everything in between.
The news you really want to hear. The Geek Report. Real news for geeks. Saturday afternoons at 3:30 on CW30.
If you like this video, then we invite you to subscribe to our channel, The County Seat. You can do that here. And we invite you to share with your friends. We also invite you to get all the latest up-to-date information by following us on our social media channels. And if all else fails, make sure that you watch The County Seat Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on ABC4 Utah.